This clown murdered 33 men and hid their bodies under the crawl space of his house. By hiding in his friendly persona as Pogo the Clown, he lured innocent victims to their demise. He tricked people into wearing handcuffs for a magic trick, then helplessly raped and tortured his captives before taking their lives.
And I said, well, here, you put it around. This is hard trying to do this. Why don't you put your hand out? Okay, here. What I told him, I said, here, all you do is you wrap it around, you put one knot in it. And I said, then you put a second knot in it. Okay? I said, then you take a stick and stick it in here, and you just turn this. And I said, it causes a tourniquet. I said, that's the only knot I ever learned.
Precisely the kind of knot found on the ropes wrapped around the necks of the victims found under the house on Summerdale.
Why would a pillar member of the community turn into the most evil serial killer in U.S. history? Today, in Crime Diaries, we head to Chicago, Illinois to explore the case of the killer clown, John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy was born in Chicago, Illinois on March 17, 1942. In his childhood, he endured an abusive life with his alcoholic father. He was physically and mentally maltreated in his youth, as he showed signs of homosexuality. His mother tried to shield him from his father's abuse, but it only resulted in more beating. Gacy was also sexually molested by one of their family members. He grew up as an overweight and unathletic child due to a heart condition that prevented him from doing exercises. His father made it worse by suspecting that his condition was made up in an effort to gain sympathy and attention. In 1960, Gacy had an altercation with his father, which made him leave their home and live in Las Vegas. Here's where Gacy found work as an attendant at Palm Mortuary, which opened the door for dark thoughts. One evening, while alone, he climbed into the coffin of a deceased teenage male, embracing and caressing the body. Gacy eventually went back to Chicago and got married twice. He earned his father's approval, and his father apologized to him. Starting as a side hustle, Gacy founded a successful construction business called PDM, which eventually became his main livelihood. Using the money from his thriving business, Gacy was able to fund projects to help service his neighborhood. According to Gacy, this part of his life has been nothing but perfect. Unfortunately, he also earned a notorious reputation for being unable to keep his hands to himself. While he helped his community as a volunteer and led several fundraising activities, he was arrested and jailed twice due to sexual assaults on minors. Every time Gacy got released from jail, he continued terrorizing his neighborhood instead of turning a new leaf. In late 1975, Gacy made steps to get more involved in social work. His construction business expanded rapidly. In that same year, Gacy joined the Clown Club and created his two clown characters, Pogo the Clown and Patches the Clown. These steps to help in contributing to the community just gave him more opportunities to take advantage of his victims. It was evident that Gacy has a double life. This connected to how he described his personas as Pogo as a happy clown, whereas Patches was a more villainous character. Just like his father, he became an alcoholic and was seen passed out in bars wearing his multi-personality costumes. On January 3, 1972, Gacy killed his first victim. He lured a 16-year-old boy named Timothy Jack McCoy into his car. He took McCoy to his house with the promise that he could spend the remainder of the night and be driven back in the morning. The next day, January 4, 1972, at 6:45 a.m., Gacy saw McCoy carrying a knife. Gacy's paranoia kicked in instantly, so he jumped the ladder. The two fought a ground wrestling brawl. Ultimately, Gacy overpowered McCoy and took the knife. he stabbed him repeatedly to his death. As McCoy lay dead, Gacy went to his kitchen and saw a well-prepared breakfast on his kitchen table. McCoy had set the table for the two of them. Gacy realized that McCoy didn't have any ill intentions with the knife. McCoy walked into Gacy's room to wake him up, while absent-mindedly carrying the kitchen knife in his hand, which he mistook as a threat due to his paranoia. Gacy buried McCoy in his crawlspace. This casualty fueled Gacy's bloodthirst. In an interview, Gacy said that listening to McCoy gasp for air as he was dying made him aroused. Gacy said, "That's when I realized that death was the ultimate thrill." This was the start of his killing spree. In a span of 6 years, Gacy murdered at least 33 young men and buried 26 of them in the crawl space of his house. Some of his victims were people that were deceived for a job position in his construction business. Some victims were grabbed by force through drugging, and others were conned into following Gacy, who often carried a sheriff's badge, posing as a policeman. Inside Gacy's home, his usual modus operandi was to ply his targets with alcohol and drugs, generally gaining their trust. He would then produce a pair of handcuffs to show a fake magic trick routine. He typically cuffed his own hands behind his back, then surreptitiously released himself with the key, which he hid between his fingers. He then offered to show his victim how he released himself from the handcuffs. With his victims shackled and unable to free themselves, Gacy attacks his victims. Gacy referred to this act of restraining his victim as the handcuff trick. Gacy tortured his victims before killing them. As they struggled to free themselves from the cuffs, they were inflicted with cigarette burns and were partially drowned in the bathroom. Gacy typically murdered his victims by placing a rope tourniquet around their necks and progressively tightening the rope with a hammer handle. Gacy named this act as the rope trick, frequently informing his captives, "This is the last trick." After the victim's death, Gacy usually stored the body under his bed for up to 24 hours before burying it in the crawlspace, where he periodically poured quicklime to hasten the decomposition process. Some victims' bodies were taken to his garage, and some were thrown into the Des Plaines River. On December 13, 1978, Des Plaines police obtained a warrant to search Gacy's house for being the prime suspect in the disappearance of his last victim, Robert Jerome Piest. Police immediately noticed that his house gave off a disgusting smell of rotting flesh. This search of Gacy's property revealed several suspicious items, including a police badge and a pistol inside an office drawer. Unfortunately, these suspicious items were insufficient evidence for the disappearance. This search was followed by constant police surveillance, which strained Gacy mentally. Gacy's intellect cracked under pressure. On the evening of December 20th, Gacy drove to his lawyer's office to admit his crimes. Gacy picked up a copy of the newspaper, pointed to a front-page article covering the disappearance of Piest, and said, "This boy is dead. He's in a river." He then informed his attorneys that he had been the judge, jury, and executioner of many, many people, and that he now wanted to be the same for himself. He said that he murdered at least 30 victims, most of whom he had buried in his crawlspace, and had disposed of 5 other bodies in the Des Plaines River. He had buried their bodies in his crawlspace, as he believed they were his property. After leaving his lawyer's office, Gacy drove to his friends' houses to say his last farewells. The police confronted Gacy about their intentions to search his crawlspace for the body of Piest. Gacy confessed to the killing, but claimed that it was done due to self-defense. Within minutes, a policeman had uncovered decayed flesh and a human arm bone. He immediately shouted to the investigators that they could charge Gacy with murder, adding, "I think this place is full of kids." The investigators unearthed several rotting bodies under Gacy's crawlspace. After being informed that the police had found human remains in his crawl space, Gacy told officers he wanted to clear the air, adding he had known his arrest was inevitable. On February 6, 1980, Gacy was brought to trial for 33 murder charges. After more than 2 hours, the jury deliberated the sentencing of Gacy to death for each murder committed. His execution was set for June 2, 1980. Gacy was transferred from the Menard Correctional Center to Stateville Correctional Center in Crest Hill to be executed. That afternoon, he was allowed a private picnic on the prison grounds with his family. This story is a reminder to never trust anyone, even the most promising members of society. The clown who caused your laugh today could cause your tear tomorrow. What are your thoughts about the case of John Wayne Gacy? Tell us in the comments section. Also, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon to get the latest updates. This has been Crime Diaries, and until next time, don't be another statistic.